My name is Thomas Ray Whitaker, and on my 65th birthday, I got a text from my only son that read, "Your gift, Dad. I sold your car." Imagine sitting in a corner booth at a diner in Lancaster, Ohio, steam rising off a chipped mug of black coffee, a piece of coconut cream pie already ordered for the occasion, and then seeing those words pop up on the screen. My wife Linda, sitting across from me with her hair pinned back the way she's worn it since high school, leaned forward to peek. She let out a dry chuckle, not because it was funny, but because it was so typical. Her smile wasn't joy, it was a tired, knowing curve of the lips that said, "We've been here before, Tom." I didn't throw the phone. I didn't curse. I just stared at that text until the letters blurred. The clink of forks and the low murmur of farmers in ball caps talking about soybean yields filled the air around me. I felt strangely calm, like a man watching a storm roll in across a flat field. I stirred my coffee, heard the spoon tap against ceramic, and thought about that car, my old Ford F-150. Bought it brand new in '92, hauled lumber with it, drove it to every VFW fish fry, taught my boy Mark how to drive stick on back roads with that truck. He'd stalled it 100 times and laughed about it. Now he claimed he'd sold it like it was a video game item. Linda finally said, "Don't get riled up. He just wants attention." That's his language, shock and insult. She took a bite of her eggs, cool as can be. I wanted to ask why we raised a son who thought cruelty was a punchline, but I didn't. I just nodded. 2 hours later, as the rain cleared and the diner crowd thinned, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't a text. It was Mark's voice, sharp with panic. "Dad, you gotta help me. Please, Dad. I need bail." His words tumbled out like a kid caught stealing cookies. Only he wasn't 8 anymore. He was 35, and the mess was bigger than crumbs on the counter. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, my mind drifted back through the years. How many times had I been here? Midnight calls from county jail, bounced checks I quietly covered the time he pawned his mother's necklace and swore he'd buy it back. Each memory felt like another weight pressing down, and I realized I wasn't angry at that text. I was just tired. The diner's neon sign buzzed overhead. I told him we'll talk later. Then I hung up, slipped the phone into my flannel pocket and looked at Linda. Her eyes asked the question she didn't speak. I said, "This time feels different." She nodded, still smiling that weary smile. What I hadn't told Mark, what I hadn't told anybody except Linda, was that months ago I'd already taken the truck out of his reach. I'd signed the title over to Linda after his last stunt. The Ford was safe in our garage, untouched, waiting. His text was nothing but smoke and bluster, maybe a failed scam gone wrong. That gave me a strange sense of power, quiet but firm like a card player holding the ace up his sleeve. I finished my pie, paid the check with cash, and stepped out into the fresh air. The storm had passed, but the world still smelled of rain and asphalt. I knew the real storm was just beginning, and for the first time in years, I was ready to let it hit him instead of shielding him from it. Mark's voice kept echoing in my ears long after I slid the phone back into my pocket. "Dad, please bail me out." It wasn't the first time I'd heard that tone, the jittery desperation, the edge of shame wrapped in arrogance, but something about it hit differently that afternoon. Maybe it was the way the diner had gone quiet, or the way Linda kept buttering her toast like nothing had happened, or maybe it was because 65 candles had been blown out that morning, and I realized I didn't have another decade to waste cleaning up after my son. We drove home slowly, the wipers squeaking across glass that didn't need them anymore. I thought about all the times I'd pulled Mark out of holes he dug himself into. The car accidents, the bad checks, the fights outside bars in Columbus. Each time I'd believed him when he promised to straighten up. Each time I told myself fathers are supposed to protect their sons. But protection had turned into enabling, and enabling had turned into chains that dragged both of us down. Back in the driveway of our small 2-bedroom house on Fairview Avenue, the old Ford sat under the carport blue paint dulled by years, but body solid as the day I drove it off the lot. I ran my hand along the hood, feeling the cold metal. Linda came up behind me and whispered, "He thinks it's gone." "Yeah," I said, "and maybe that's the point." That truck wasn't just steel and wheels. It was every Saturday spent teaching him how to haul mulch, every trip to his baseball practices, every moment I'd tried to build a bridge between us. And now, the son who once beamed sitting in that passenger seat had reduced it to a punchline in a text. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the kitchen table where bills were stacked neatly in a shoebox. Linda sat across from me, glasses perched low on her nose. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside was the title to the truck already signed over to Linda 6 months earlier. I slid it across the table. "You know why I did this," I said. She nodded. "You knew he'd try something." "Yeah," I said, "and I'm tired of being surprised." I remembered the night I made that choice. Mark had shown up at our door drunk, demanding cash, said he needed to fix something before a buddy came after him. He staggered into the garage, tried to grab the keys, but I stopped him. That night I promised myself he would never take that truck from me, at least not legally. Now, holding that folder felt like holding a shield. I wasn't defenseless anymore. I had prepared for this moment even if I didn't realize it at the time. The phone rang again. Same number, same panic. I let it go to voicemail. Linda broke the silence. "You think he's in real trouble this time?" I think I said slowly, "He finally ran into something bigger than me bailing him out." I looked out the window at the truck sitting steady in the driveway. My chest tightened not from anger, but from the weight of 35 years of broken promises. For once I didn't feel the urge to rush to his side. I felt something else resolve. That night, I lay awake listening to the creak of the house, settling the distant hum of a train passing through town. Linda's breathing was steady beside me. I thought about my father, a coal miner who never had much, but gave what little he did to keep food on the table. He'd told me once, "Son, the world doesn't give out do-overs. You screw up, you own it." I had tried to soften that truth for Mark his whole life. Maybe I'd done him no favors by doing so. By morning, the decision had settled in my bones. I wasn't going to call back, not yet. If Mark wanted help, he'd have to face me with open eyes and an honest tongue. I wouldn't play the silent banker anymore. At sunrise, I went out to the garage, turned the key in the Ford, and listened to the engine rumble alive. The sound filled the small space like a hymn. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it the way a soldier might grip his rifle, steady, purposeful. This truck had carried me through storms and celebrations. It would carry me through this too. I whispered to myself, "This time he learns." The next afternoon, the sky was washed pale blue, the kind you see after 2 straight days of rain. I stood at the edge of my driveway with the newspaper tucked under my arm and watched the mail truck rumble down the street. Kids pedaled by on their bikes, laughing in that high, careless way that makes you remember summers gone by. I thought about how Mark used to ride his Schwinn in circles out here, hollering, "Watch me, Dad," until the sun sank behind the maples. Those memories cut sharper now because of what came later. By the time he hit high school, Watch Me Dad had turned into slammed doors and report cards stuffed into the bottom of his backpack. At 16, he borrowed the truck without asking and sideswiped a telephone pole. Linda cried when she saw the dent. I swallowed my temper and paid the bill. At 20, he dropped out of community college after a semester, saying books weren't for him. By 22, he was calling at odd hours, needing a ride home, his voice thick with liquor. I had covered bad checks, bailed him out of a bar fight in Columbus, and once drove 3 hours to bring him home after he called from a gas station with an empty tank and empty pockets. Each time I told myself it was the last. Each time, Linda shook her head but stood beside me, a quiet partner in this endless cycle. The truck bore the brunt of it. That old Ford was our mule, hauling his furniture from one short-lived apartment to another, pulling his broken-down Camaro with a tow strap, and carting him and his friends to concerts they couldn't afford. Every stain on the upholstery, every scratch on the bed rails, told a story of my son taking and me giving. I walked back inside, with the paper set it down next to the phone, and stared at it. The silence in the kitchen felt heavy. Linda was humming softly while rinsing dishes, her hands steady. She had learned not to ask what I was thinking in these moments. She knew. 6 months ago, after Mark had shown up drunk and tried to snatch the truck keys right out of my pocket, I had marched down to the DMV and signed the title over to Linda. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, realizing it had come to that, protecting a piece of steel from my own flesh and blood. But I did it because I knew the day would come when he would push too far. And now here it was, a text on my birthday, claiming he'd sold it. A scam, a bluff. Either way, the message was clear. He thought I was still the same fool ready to cover for him. He didn't know I had already built a wall he couldn't climb. That evening I pulled out the manila folder again and ran my fingers over the crisp edges of the paperwork. Linda sat across from me, knitting her needles, clicking rhythmically. "You're awfully quiet," she said. "I'm thinking about my father," I told her. "He used to say, 'Son, life doesn't hand out do-overs. You break it, you buy it.'" She glanced at me over her glasses. "Maybe it's time Mark hears that for real." I nodded. Maybe it's past time. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room in orange light, the phone rang again. Same number. I let it buzz until the machine picked up. His voice spilled through the static. "Dad, please. I messed up. Just come get me." I didn't move. I just sat there listening. When the line went dead, Linda reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to answer this time," she whispered. And for the first time in 35 years, I believed her. The call that finally shook the walls came just as I was finishing my morning coffee. The phone rattled across the kitchen counter, buzzing like a trapped hornet. I glanced at the screen. Same number, same dread. I almost let it roll to voicemail again, but something in me decided to pick up. Dad Mark's voice cracked like a teenager's, though he was 35. "They've got me down at the county. They're saying I tried to sell a truck that wasn't mine. Dad, you gotta bail me out, please. I can't stay here." His words tumbled so fast I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I caught every other one police paperwork charges. My grip tightened on the mug. I stared out the window at the Ford, sitting calm in the driveway, morning sun glinting off the windshield like an answer to a prayer. "Slow down," I said, my voice even. "Where exactly are you?" "Fairfield County Jail," he hissed. "Dad, please, I swear it's a misunderstanding. The guy who was buying it, he lied or something. Just come down here. Get me out." I pictured the beige brick building on Broad Street, the one I'd driven past 100 times but never stepped inside. A place for other people's sons, not mine. Until now. "I'll think about it," I said, then hung up. Linda raised her eyebrows from across the table. She'd been listening, of course. She always listened. "You're not really going, are you?" "I'll drive down," I said, standing. "But I'm not going to do what he thinks." The county jail smelled like bleach and despair. A guard in a buzz cut led me through a metal detector and down a corridor lined with beige paint that peeled at the corners. I could hear muffled voices, the clang of a door somewhere deeper in. Then I saw him, Mark, in an orange jumpsuit, hair disheveled, eyes wild. He pressed his hands against the glass like I was his lifeline. "Dad, thank God. Tell them the truck's mine, that you gave it to me. Just say it." I felt something inside me harden. He wasn't asking for help. He was asking me to lie. I sat down across from him, the cold of the metal chair seeping through my jeans. "That truck isn't yours, Mark. It's in your mother's name. Has been for months." His mouth fell open. For once, he was speechless. "You set yourself up," I said calmly, "and I'm not pulling you out of this one." You can't just leave me here," he stammered. "Dad, please, just pay the bail. I'll fix it, I promise." Promises. I'd heard them all before, stitched together with panic and broken before the ink dried. I stood up, leaned close to the glass. "This is where you learn. This is where I stop saving you." His fists pounded against the partition as the guard signaled time was up. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the autumn air smelled of leaves and diesel from the buses at the depot down the street. I pulled my flannel tighter around me and exhaled long. For the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. "At home?" Linda asked. "Well." I poured myself another coffee. Steady hands now. He wanted me to lie, to cover for him. I told him no. She nodded, her lips pressing together in something that looked like both sorrow and relief. "About time," she whispered. That night I lay awake again, listening to the house creak, listening to my own heartbeat. I thought of my father, of that line he'd always say, "The world doesn't give do-overs." I realized I had just handed those words finally to my son. And though he might hate me for it, some part of me prayed he would understand. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and floor wax, like every public building that hadn't been updated since the 70s. Linda and I walked side by side through the metal detector, her arm brushing mine, steadying me even when I didn't think I needed steadying. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a bailiff barked names like a roll call at boot camp. Mark shuffled in wearing shackles that clinked with each step. His hair was greasy, his jaw unshaven, his eyes darting around until they landed on me. For a moment I saw the boy he'd been the one who used to grin when I pushed him on the swing. Then his lips curled into that familiar sneer, the one that always came right before he asked for something. "Dad," he muttered as they sat him at the defendant's table. The judge was a gray-haired woman named Carter, firm voice, no nonsense. She read the charges: attempted fraud, filing false paperwork, intent to sell stolen property. My chest tightened at each word. Mark fidgeted, shooting me glances like I might wave a magic wand and make it vanish. When she asked for comments, Mark's lawyer, a weary public defender, said, "Your Honor, my client's father is here. He's willing to speak." All eyes turned to me. I stood, cleared my throat, and let the truth roll out. "Your Honor, that truck isn't my son's. It's titled in my wife's name. Has been for months. He knew it wasn't his to sell." Mark's head whipped toward me, eyes wide with betrayal. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth," I said evenly. My voice didn't shake. "I've bailed him out before, paid debts, covered lies, but I won't this time. He has to stand on his own feet." The courtroom buzzed. Judge Carter banged her gavel once. "Order." She studied me, then looked at Mark. "Mr. Whitaker, it seems you've been given more chances than most. The law isn't here to coddle you. Bail is set at $5,000. $5,000. In the past, I would have emptied savings without a thought. But this time I just sat back down, folded my hands, and stayed quiet. Mark twisted in his chair. "Dad, please, just pay it. I'll pay you back, I swear." Linda touched my knee under the bench. I could feel her silent plea hold strong. When the session ended, Mark was led away shouting my name. The chains clinked with each step, echoing through the chamber. People stared at me, some with pity, some with respect. I kept my face calm. Outside on the courthouse steps, Linda slipped her hand into mine. "That was the hardest thing you've ever done," she said softly. "Maybe the most necessary," I replied. We walked past reporters gathered for another case, past men smoking in the shade of the flagpole, past the world that kept on turning. My son was behind bars, but for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't. That night I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid out conditions as clear as day. If Mark wanted my help, he'd have to sign on to every one of them. No more handouts, no more lies. He would work in my garage for half a year without pay back debts, with proof, get counseling, and show up at family therapy. If he agreed, I'd consider helping with the bail. If not, he could sit. I sealed the envelope and set it on the counter. Linda looked at me, her eyes both tired and proud. "He'll hate you for it," she said. Maybe I admitted, but maybe he'll respect me too, finally. As I turned out the kitchen light, I felt the house settle around me. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady like the quiet before dawn. The courthouse hallway was crowded with footsteps and echoes when Mark shuffled back in for the arraignment. The smell of coffee and old paper hung in the air. I sat with Linda in the second row, the manila envelope resting heavy in my lap. I could feel the sweat on my palms soaking through. Mark's eyes found me immediately. He looked ragged like a boxer in the 6th round, but his chin was still tilted in that cocky way. When the judge asked about bail, the public defender cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client's father has a statement." I stood. My knees creaked, but my voice didn't. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." I walked forward, handed the bailiff the sealed envelope, and asked that it be passed to Mark. The judge raised an eyebrow, but allowed it. Mark tore it open, eyes skimming fast. His face went pale, then flushed red. He slammed the paper down. "This is blackmail." "It's the truth," I said evenly. "You want my help, you sign it. You don't want it, you don't get it." The judge peered over her glasses. "What's in that letter, Mr. Whitaker?" I took a breath. Conditions. 6 months working in my garage without pay, paying back old debts with receipts, counseling, family therapy, no more using my accounts or my name. He agrees, I'll consider posting bail. He refuses, then the law takes its course. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge tapped her gavel once. Quiet. She turned to Mark. "Your father's not wrong. You've had chance after chance." Mark glared at me, jaw tight. "You'd really let me rot." I met his stare. "I'd rather let you learn." The judge called a recess, giving Mark time to consider. They let him out through the side door shackles, clinking like punctuation marks to my words. Linda squeezed my hand. "You were steady," she whispered. I nodded, though inside my chest rattled like loose bolts in a coffee can. Years of bailing him out had conditioned me to jump. Now staying still felt like holding a hot coal and refusing to drop it. When the court reconvened, Mark shuffled back in. His eyes avoided mine, fixed on the floor. The letter was folded neatly in his hands. He cleared his throat, voice rough. "Your Honor, I'll sign." For a long moment the room was silent. Then Judge Carter leaned forward. "Very well. The agreement is not legally binding here, but it's a condition between father and son. I will release you on bond once it's paid. Mr. Whitaker." I nodded. "I'll cover it." But he knows the terms. Mark scrawled his name at the bottom, the pen scratching across paper, loud in the quiet room. His signature looked like a child's, sloppy, uneven, desperate. As we left, the clerk at the desk shook her head. "You're the toughest father I've seen in this place." I tucked the envelope under my arm. "Not tough," I said, just out of excuses. On the courthouse steps, reporters were still camped for another case, but a few turned our way when they saw Mark walk out beside me. He ducked his head, cheeks flaming. For the first time, I didn't rush to shield him. I let the world see what he had done. That night the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but steadier too, like the foundation had been reinforced. Linda made pot roast and we ate in silence until she finally asked, "Do you think he'll keep to it?" I chewed slowly, swallowed, and said he doesn't have a choice anymore. The first morning Mark showed up at the garage, he looked more like a stranger than my son. His hair was cut short from county lockup, his face hollow, his eyes tired, but still burning with that flicker of resentment I knew too well. He shoved his hands deep in the pockets of his worn jeans and muttered, "So where do you want me?" I handed him a rag. "Start with the oil pans. Every car on that lot gets checked." He sighed loud enough for the whole block to hear, but he got down on the creeper and rolled under the first pickup. The clang of his wrench echoed through the garage, mixing with the smell of gasoline and grease. For once, he wasn't running from a problem, he was on his back staring at it. Day after day he came. No paycheck, no shortcuts. Linda packed him a sandwich at noon, nothing more. At first, he ate in silence, glaring at the floor. But by the third week, he started asking questions. "Why does this gasket always blow? What's the torque on these bolts?" His hands grew calloused, his voice steadier. One afternoon, as he was tightening a drain plug, he muttered, "I hate you for making me do this. I didn't look up from the carburetor I was cleaning." "Good. Hate me all you want. Just do the job right." By the fourth month, the hate had shifted. He didn't say it out loud, but I saw it in the way he checked his work twice and the way he stayed late without being asked. One Friday, he even came early, beating me to the garage. When I asked why, he just shrugged. Counseling wasn't easy. He sat stiff in the circle of folding chairs, arms crossed, but week by week he started speaking, first in grumbles, then in sentences. "I always thought you'd fix it for me. I figured Mom would cover me." The therapist nodded, scribbling notes while Linda sat beside me with tears in her eyes. The day came when he handed me receipts, small debts paid off, money trickling back to folks he'd wronged. I flipped through them slowly, my fingers trembling. For the first time in decades, I saw not just my son, but a man trying to stand up. Then, one evening as the sun burned low over the cornfields, he walked into the garage holding the old Ford's keys. He placed them on the workbench without a word. I looked at him then, at the truck parked outside, still shining under years of dust and care. Finally he said, "It's not the truck I needed. It was you saying no." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat thick as gravel. For once, I didn't lecture. I just nodded and slid the keys back across the bench. "Keep working. You'll earn it." That night, Linda and I sat on the porch, cicadas buzzing in the trees. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You think he's changed?" I sipped my coffee, watching the last light fade. He's learning, and maybe that's enough. To anyone listening, revenge might sound like slammed doors or fists on glass. But for me, revenge was quieter. It was sitting still while the storm hit him instead of me. It was holding the line until he finally saw what stood behind it. And on my 66th birthday, a year after that first text, Mark didn't send a message. He walked into the kitchen, set a homemade cake on the table, and said, "Happy birthday, Dad." For the first time in years, I smiled without bitterness. Revenge had done its work, responsibility had followed, and maybe respect was finally on its way. If you've stayed with me through this story, ask yourself who in your life needs you to stop saying yes. Sometimes the strongest love is the hardest truth. Share this story if it struck a chord, or tell me yours. And if you want to hear more tales like mine, well, you know where to find me.